Welcome, everybody. My name is Brian Nelson here at CBT Nuggets. I'm a member of the sales team, and on behalf of everyone, we'd like to thank you. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for setting some time aside today. We have Sean Powers just waiting to get at this topic for today, Apache Tomcat. So without any further delay, I am going to hand it over to Mr. Powers. Thank you all.
All right, that's me. I'm Sean. I'm glad everybody's here today. And we're going to talk about Apache Tomcat. So the reason that I thought it would be a good topic to do a webinar on is because actually one of my coworkers contacted me because he had Apache installed but couldn't get his Java app to run. And that's because he had the Apache web server running, not the Apache Java servlet engine Tomcat running. So I thought if one of the professionals that I work with wasn't really certain about Tomcat and what it did, probably that's the case for a lot of people. And if I'm going to be completely honest, that was me not too long ago. I took a job and I was in charge of a Java app running on Tomcat, and I didn't even know what it was. So today we're going to go through how to set up Tomcat, how to administer it a little bit, but just to get you familiar with what it is and how it works. I do have a poll up here. I'm not going to leave this poll up here for very long, but it's just so that people can answer, so I get a feel for what your understanding level of Apache Tomcat is. And if you don't answer it, that's fine. I'm going to cover everything. I just wanted to focus on individual things, more particularly if people are struggling. So I got to get right down to business because we have a whole bunch of stuff to cover. And the first thing that we're going to do is talk about installation. Now, to install Tomcat, I'm going to use Linux for a couple reasons. One, because I'm a Linux nerd, and that's just that's just what I know. But one of the other reasons is now Apache Tomcat will run just fine on Windows. There's probably an installation package for OS X. Linux, it works really smooth. I think that it's probably most often installed on Linux. And the one time I've used it in Windows, there was issues with a service startup problem, and I just want to show you Linux. Also, the advantage with Linux is most people think it's the most confusing and the hardest to manage. I want to debunk that myth. So we're going to use Ubuntu today as our Linux distribution that we're going to use. And the bulk of this webinar is going to be you looking at my screen. So let me share out my workstation right now. Hopefully you're going to see this. Now you should be seeing my Ubuntu install on my virtual machine. So this is a terminal window. I also have a web browser right here that's going to be, we're going to go between the command line and the web browser just so that we can see how things are going. Now the first step to install Tomcat is just like installing any other package. Now if you're using CentOS or a different distribution, just use those particular tools. But you're going to install Tomcat 7. But you have to use the terminology to install things properly. So sudo apt-get install Tomcat 7 is going to install the Tomcat package. Now why Tomcat 7? Well, that's just the most recent version of Tomcat and the one that we want to be focusing on today, because that's probably what you're going to be installing is Tomcat 7. So Tomcat 7 is in the package. It's installed. We now have Tomcat installed on our server. I hope that this has been informative for you. Have a great day. I'll talk to you later. Well, no, there's a little bit more to talk about, but literally that's all it takes on Linux to install Tomcat. So we've installed the Tomcat servlet engine, and to test that, we're going to go on our web browser. Now realize this is just one computer that we're on right now. Okay, so I installed Tomcat on this computer. This web browser is running on the same computer. So we're going to access localhost :8080. This is one of those things that you don't necessarily know intuitively, but Tomcat by default will run on port 8080 on your server. So if I hit that, we should now get this fancy, well not fancy, just all text screen that says it works. So this is the way to test to make sure that Apache Tomcat starts up and it's working correctly. But all this gives you is this simple page. It works. If you've installed Apache Web Server, I think there's a similar page that says it works, success. The real chore, or the real work comes when you install a WAR file. And I think I have a fancy slide for that, which I'll put up here. while I'm explaining. So the first way we're going to install a WAR file or deploy a WAR file is using the command line. And the reason I want to do that is because I really want you to understand what's happening when a web application archive or WAR archive is deployed on this Java servlet engine. So probably if you're installing Tomcat, somebody said to you, hey, I have this WAR file I need to deploy. You need to install Tomcat. So you will most likely be given, or you will download, or somehow you will be given a WAR file. It's just a file with the extension WAR at the end. Okay, and I have that right here, sample.war. Let me scooch this over and this over. So sample.war is just that. It's like a hello world sample file. In order to deploy a WAR file into Tomcat, all you have to do is copy that into the web apps folder. This is another one of those things that you wouldn't intuitively know. You have to find the web apps folder for your Tomcat 7 install. On Ubuntu or Debian, it's going to be in a folder, var lib Tomcat 7 web apps. Now, again, I'm a little frustrated with this crazy path that you're just expected to know where the files are living, right? So in here, all there is right now is a folder called root. I'm going to talk about root at the end of this presentation, but right now just know that this is where web apps are deployed. So in order to deploy sample.war, all we do is copy it. Now I'm going to say sudo so that I have the permissions to copy files. CP for copy, home, spowers, desktop, sample.war to dot. Hopefully you're familiar enough with Linux to understand all I'm doing here is copying this WAR file up here to this directory that we switched into. Okay, so I'm going to hit enter. And now see sample.war has been copied. Now the cool thing about Tomcat is there's nothing to do for actually deploying this web archive or this Java application other than copying it in there. Because as soon as it appears in the web apps folder, let's hit ls again and see what happens. Bam, Tomcat deployed it into a folder called sample. So you don't have to do anything other than copy it there, and it hot deploys that application. So now if I were to go to localhost port 8080/sample, all of a sudden, boom, here is the fully deployed application that we just put in there. Now we can test it out to make sure it's working. Sure enough, it's working. All it is, again, is a hello world example. You'll be getting a bigger program, I'm sure, to deploy. But that's all you have to do is copy it in there, and it automatically deploys. Now if you want to undeploy it, well, you see it's created this folder in here that it's expanded. However, rm sample.war, all you have to do is erase or delete or rm the sample.war file, and then just like it hot deployed, it will hot undeploy. So if we hit ls again, well, it's still there. It's still undeploying. There. So it disappeared. You don't have to do anything except manipulate whether this .war file is there or not there. It's really cool. That's all it takes to install Tomcat and deploy application. But remember back in my slide, I said that this was the hard way. So if you're a little frustrated with all the path names and copying files and, oh my goodness, that's harder than I thought it was going to be, well, don't worry, because there is another way. And you're probably thinking, why didn't we do this first? Well, because I wanted you to understand what was happening behind the scenes. Maybe it means you'll appreciate these things a little bit more. Maybe it doesn't. But I need to go back to my demo. So share VMware Workstation. So if you remember when we went to the original It Works page, if you read this while I was jabbering, you probably noticed that it said, hey, Sean, well, it didn't mention me by name, but Sean, you might want to consider installing these things, Tomcat 7 Docs, Tomcat 7 Example, Tomcat 7 Admin. And what these do, it gives you examples and documentation. But this, which you should look at because they're very awesome, and once they're installed, you can just click and read all sorts of documentation. But the big thing are these manager web apps. So let's install all of these things really quickly. And to do that, you can either use your package management GUI system, or I'm just going to do apt-get install Tomcat 7-docs, Tomcat 7-examples, and Tomcat 7-admin. It's going to install all of these things. And what this does is these are actually web apps that are deployed automatically by the installation process. So once those are installed, these links here are going to work. So if we click on the Manager web app, well, that sounds like something I would like to do. So let's click on that. But bam, it asks for a login and password, which we don't have. The login and password doesn't actually exist, which is a little bit frustrating. Okay, so what we have to do in order to do the easy way and use the web app, we actually have to go to the command line and do some terribly complicated things in order to make that work for us. So back in the command line, go to etc. Tomcat 7. Type ls if you want to see what's in there. We're going to be editing the Tomcat users.xml. Now this is going to be different than your system users. This isn't like spowers or root. We're going to edit this file. I'm going to use VI because I'm super nerdy, but you can use whatever editor you want. And we're going to go down. Thankfully, this has a nice little section here. This is all commented out. However, this format is what we're going to use to create an admin user. So we're going to go right here. I'm just going to do that exact same format. So username equals, we're going to say test, password equals test. Oh, what a horrible thing. Don't ever use these in production, these username and password. Roles equal. Now this is something, again, you don't intuitively know, but it was on that It Works page. Okay, if you look at that It Works page, it tells you the roles you need to give are manager-GUI and admin-GUI. And follow the format so that it matches what it looks like here. We're going to save this file. We need to restart Tomcat so that it rereads that Tomcat users XML file. So service Tomcat 7 restart. If I'm going so fast and you don't remember all of these things, don't worry. This webinar is actually going to be available after the fact, so you can go back and look and say, what was it that he said I needed to do? It's going to be there. It's going to be archived, so you can go back. So once that's there, so once it's restarted, we can go back here, and I'm going to now type. Remember, all I did is click on this link here on the It Works page. Test, hit enter. And no, I don't want to remember that password. It's going to bring us into the Tomcat Application Manager. Now, if you look up here, all it's done is taken us to /manager. Hit enter. It'll ask for the username and password. Here we are. Now, this is the cool part. If you set up a Tomcat user so that you can go in here, you can actually deploy something with a nice click and browse and deploy kind of thing going on, instead of the manually copying things on the command line. So if we go to http://localhost:8080/sample, it's going to say, oh, it's still there, isn't it? Let's go and undeploy it. I thought I'd undeployed it. It did undeploy. Why is it still showing up there? Oh, I bet it was cached in the browser. Yeah, okay. I thought that was one of those times where the webinar goes, oh, terribly, terribly off kilter. It was just a cached copy that the browser had. So if we hit refresh, we can see it's saying, dude, there's no sample here. There's nothing deployed named sample. So we know that it's not currently deployed. If we go over to the manager, we can browse for that WAR file. On the desktop, sample.war, open, click deploy. So all I've done is clicked and browsed, and it's all been GUI. And now, bam, it shows all the things that are deployed. Sample is one of the things that's now deployed. So if we go over here and hit refresh, it's going to show us the Hello World application. It's been deployed without ever needing to go to the command line. So that's a really powerful tool. Pardon me, it's a powerful tool that you can use on the web instead of needing to go to the command line, going to var lib Tomcat 7 web apps folder. It will do all of that automatically. And the same thing, you can actually undeploy. So this is sample. Just click on the undeploy button, and bam, it's gone. So if we come back over here and I click refresh, it's not there anymore. So you can deploy and undeploy with the web app. It's really nice. It's really easy to use. And since we installed those docs and examples, I just want to show you. I urge you to install this and then play around. So the examples are here, which is nice. You can just click on examples. And it gives us all of these examples of Java code that is now installed for us to look at. We can execute it. Hello world. how did that work? You can click on the source code and look at the source code and see what caused that. So if you're trying to learn Java, the examples are a great way to go as well. But if you're just worrying about administering things, these examples are just something to play with. You don't really need to have the examples installed in order to get Apache working. Remember, we don't even have to have the manager app installed in order to make Tomcat work. All we have to do is install Tomcat 7. All right, let's go back and see what's next on our slide. So the extra tools, these are the web app tools that we installed. Hopefully it's pretty easy. You understand it can be pretty easy to install stuff after you get those tools installed. And what that leaves is tweaking. I still want you to be able to, hold on just a second, let me drink some water. You still need to be able to be comfortable using the system in production, right? There are some things that you're probably going to want to change. For example, do you remember, if I were to share out the VMware Workstation again, this 8080, most people don't like that, right? Most people will say it's a browser. I don't want to have to type port 8080. So how is it you can get it to work on port 80 so it's just like a web browser? Well, yes, absolutely you can. It's not terribly difficult. Ubuntu has a nice, slick way of going about it. If you're on another platform, you may have to do some fancy firewall rules to redirect port 8080 to port 80. But with Ubuntu, it's super simple. We need to go into the etc. Tomcat 7 folder. So here we have these files again. Remember, we edited Tomcat users.xml, but right now we're going to edit server.xml. So we're going to edit this. Now this is a complicated file, so just search for 8080. I know that seems like a cheap shortcut, but hey, it is what it is. If you look for 8080, it's going to bring you to this connector stanza, this section here. You need to change this port 8080 to, I'm sure you guessed it by now, port 80. Okay? Save that file. And if you restart Tomcat, you would think, hey, now we can access it on port 80 just like a web browser. Well, unfortunately, no. There's some security built into ports below 1024 that non-privileged users aren't allowed to start a server. Now, this doesn't run as root. This runs as Tomcat. So we have to make one more change, and that's going to be in etc. default Tomcat 7, which is just a file. So we're going to edit the Tomcat 7 file in the etc. default folder. This is, again, on Ubuntu. This slick way of doing things isn't on every single distribution, but Ubuntu it is. If you go open this file and go to the bottom, which says auth-bind equals no, uncomment it, change it to auth-bind equals yes, what this will do is it allows the Tomcat user to then use a port below 1024. Maybe you consider it a security risk. That's outside of the scope of this webinar, but that's basically how you go about it. Then we need to service Tomcat 7 restart. It's going to restart the Tomcat servlet engine. And there, it started. So now if we just go to http://localhost, haha, it works. It's no longer running on port 8080. It's now running on the regular old port. You don't need that colon, any numbers at all. It's just on port 80, so you don't have to type anything. Okay, all these examples should work now because it's running on port 80 for everything. So that's how you get it running on port 80. And then when we look at the time, I still have enough time. I want to show you one more thing that you should know about how Tomcat works, and that is the whole root thing. So every time we deploy something like our sample program, which I don't think is deployed currently. I think I got rid of that. Yeah, sample's not there. But when we deploy it, we always have to type this path, right? And that path is determined by the name of the war file. So var lib Tomcat 7 web apps, again, a weird path, but once you type it 1,000 times, it'll become second nature. If we put sample.war in here, it creates a folder called sample, and then we access it by typing that path here. We type sample. So how is it that we would get something in the root level of this actual directory? You know, if we don't want to have to type a slash in something, we just want to type localhost and get a file. Well, in order to do that, that's where this fancy root, all capital root, comes into play. When this original it works was installed, it was put in this folder called root, all in capital letters, and that is what is served with just the / with nothing after it. It serves whatever is in the root folder. It's not really intuitive because if we create a folder called sample, we have to type that in. But root is a special name. Okay, I'm gonna move that. Sudo move root, old root. So now seeing here, this is called old root, which has no special meaning at all to Tomcat, right? So if we go into here and we type refresh, we're going to get nothing. However, if we were to type old root, hey, it works. Okay, so we've just made this like a regular deployed WAR file, but we've changed it to old root. Now, if we wanted to have our program sample.war to become the root level application, well, what you have to do then, you probably figured this out, but I'm going to show you and pretend that it's really awesome and a huge revelation. Copy home S powers desktop sample.war to the current directory root, all in caps, .war. So now we have deployed a WAR file with the name root.war. All I did is rename sample.war to root.war, all capitals, and it's been deployed into this specially named root folder, all in caps. And now, if we come back here, get rid of old root, boom, now our Hello World application is in the default folder instead of that It Works thing that came by default with Tomcat. So we've now effectively taken sample.war and made it function at the root level of our system. So hopefully that makes sense. I think that about wraps everything up I wanted to show you. We looked at the manager tools, how to install those things. There are a handful of folders that you need to know, and for that I apologize. There's just no easy way to demonstrate that sort of thing. It's going to be that var lib Tomcat 7 web apps. It's going to be etc Tomcat 7, and it's going to be etc default in that file Tomcat 7 if you want to change it to port 80. Okay, I'm going to end my part of the presentation there to give everybody some opportunity to ask questions. Hopefully I'll be able to answer them. And I guess for this part I'm going to hand it over to Brian. Are you still there? He's not there.
I am indeed.
Okay.
I am. Thank you.
I was going to
have a couple questions.
I was a little bit worried.
You know, anything could happen. All right. Are we ready for the first question?
Yes.
Okay. If I have an Apache web server running on the same server as Apache Tomcat, can they both run on port 80?
Well, that's a complicated question. Yes and no. If you have multiple IP addresses on your server, you can say, okay, Apache web server, you listen on this IP address, and Tomcat can be set to listen from a different address, but generally that's not ideal. If you have Apache, the web server, running on port 80, you have to have Tomcat running on a different port, like 8080. However, there's a nice little you can do something called a reverse proxy, and what that does is it's worth Googling. It's actually pretty cool. It's something you set up on the Apache web server so that it acts like a virtual host, but instead of being a virtual host pointing at files, Apache web server will redirect on the back end to port 8080. So the people will never know that it's not actually running Tomcat on port 80. Apache, the web server, will redirect there. So it's possible, but not exactly like you described.
Perfect. Thank you. And before we go to the second question here, I would like to encourage anybody that has a question, feel free. Chat pod, bottom left. Let's hear them. Okay. I have a couple more. How do I deploy a WAR file with my web host provider like DreamHost?
You can't, unfortunately. Unfortunately, I'm sorry to say, but that's one of the big gotchas that comes with using Java servlets, WAR files, is most web hosting providers, GoDaddy, DreamHost, those types of things, they don't have a servlet engine for you to use. Now, the good news is there are plenty of service providers out there. I'm not going to give a list of names because I actually don't know any that are reputable over others. But just you have to specifically search for either Tomcat hosting or Java Servlet hosting, and you're going to be able to do that. Or you could set up your own system like on Amazon where you actually install the system. Or there's one more or. It's becoming more and more popular with the cloud that you could go and buy. You've probably heard of software as a service. Well, they actually also make platform as a service now, spelled PaaS. And what you can do is get that Java platform and you just buy, you rent the time or however it works with cloud services. You actually buy the ability to host Java applets or servlet applets on their cloud hosting platform. So you can do it with the traditional one, but it's possible to get that service on the cloud. You don't have to have your own local server.
Great, thank you. Okay, I have one final question, and it would be, can Tomcat be configured to use SSL?
Yes, it can. This is another one of those questions where there's the easy answer and then there's the super nerdy Sean answer. So the easy answer is, well, yes, of course. It's a little outside of the scope of right now. I can't show you in the next 2 minutes how to install an SSL cert on Tomcat, but absolutely you can without any question install an SSL cert on Tomcat, and it will be hosted over SSL. However, there is another way, and that is, like I mentioned, the reverse proxy in order to get multiple websites and then this alongside of it. You can actually install an SSL cert on Apache, which is more common, easier to find instructions to do. Install it on that virtual host, which is a reverse proxy, and so the front end or the Apache web server part will be SSL, and it will point to that port 8080 non-SSL Tomcat install. Now the advantage of that is you don't have to worry about an SSL install on Tomcat, which can be a little complex and not something you do very often. But then you do have to realize that it's not going to be a secure connection between your Apache web server and the back-end Tomcat server that reverse proxy is pointing to. If it's on the same server, it's probably not an issue, but if it's going across the server room, then it's something you may have to consider. But that's the long, nerdy Sean answer.
That is quite all right. Thank you. Okay, I think that wraps it up, Sean. Thank you. And thank everybody who joined us for spending some time with us today. And I wish you all a good day.